Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about one of the most famous novels ever written, The Stranger, by Albert Camus. The novel is actually much shorter than most people expect, and if you've read it, you probably remember how shocking the very first sentence is. It goes like this: "Mother died today, or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure." Right from the start, you might think, wait, is this some kind of serial killer thriller? But it's nothing like that. In fact, the story itself is remarkably simple. The protagonist is a man named Meursault, the same man who casually wonders whether his mother died, today or yesterday. After his mother passes away, he travels to the nursing home, where she had been living, to attend her funeral. But from the moment he arrives, he reacts very differently from what most people would expect. Someone asks, "Would you like to see your mother's face one last time?" And Meursault simply says, "No, I'm exhausted. I'd rather not." So he doesn't look. Most people spend that night staying awake, grieving and thinking about the person they've lost. Meursault doesn't. He dozes off. He smokes cigarettes. He drinks a cup of coffee. Then, after the funeral, he returns home and goes to the beach. There, he runs into Marie, a woman he used to work with. The two of them start talking, and there's an immediate spark between them. Before long, they decide to go to the movies together. And of all the films they could choose, they end up watching a comedy. Meursault also has a neighbor named Raymond, a rough character with a bit of a thug's reputation. One day, Raymond asks Meursault to write a letter for him. Without making much of it, Meursault agrees. As they become friends, Meursault later goes with Marie to visit one of Raymond's friends' beach houses. They share a meal together. They go swimming. Everything seems perfectly ordinary, until the story reaches its turning point. Sometime earlier, Raymond had brutally beaten his ex-girlfriend. Her brother, an Arab man, begins looking for Raymond. He and his companions keep following him, waiting for a chance to confront him. Eventually, they run into each other. At that moment, Raymond is carrying a gun. But Meursault says, "Give me the gun. Settle this without it." So Raymond hands it over. The confrontation ends without anyone getting hurt. Raymond and Marie head back home. Later, Meursault decides to take another walk along the beach by himself. And there, he comes face to face with the Arab man once again. For a moment, he hesitates. Should I turn back, or should I keep going? In the end, he keeps walking. The instant he sees the Arab pull out a knife, he fires the gun. Then, after the man falls to the ground, Meursault fires about 4 more shots into his body. As a result, Meursault is arrested and sent to prison, where he stands trial. But here's what's unusual. The trial isn't really about whether the killing was manslaughter, self-defense, or excessive force. Instead, it heads in a completely different direction. The court becomes fixated on the fact that Meursault didn't shed a single tear at his mother's funeral. They point out that the day after the funeral, he went to see a comedy. Rather than judging what he did, they're judging who he is. And, ironically, he's sentenced to death. While sitting in prison, Meursault wrestles with one question. Should he appeal? He goes back and forth, but eventually decides not to. Why? Because he believes there's almost no chance he'll be acquitted. And to him, spending years wasting away in prison before dying isn't much different from dying now. So he gives up on the appeal. Later, a priest comes to visit him. By this point, Meursault knows he doesn't have much time left. Even having that precious time interrupted frustrates him. Then the priest starts talking about sin and repentance. That's when Meursault finally loses his temper and lashes out at him. Afterward, he comes to an important realization. He finally understands why his mother had started a new relationship and tried to begin a new life at the nursing home. He realizes she didn't need anyone's pity, and he feels the same way about himself. Then, strangely enough, he begins to feel a sense of hope. He remembers something his mother once told him about his father. Apparently, whenever there was going to be a public execution, his father became so excited that he couldn't even sleep the night before. And afterward, he would come home and throw up. Thinking about that, Meursault imagines his own execution. He hopes that a huge crowd will come to watch, that they'll curse him and spit at him. And that's how the novel ends. Now, you might be wondering, why did a novel with a protagonist who almost seems psychopathic become such a classic? The first major idea Camus introduces is the absurd. The absurd is all about contradiction. It's the clash between what we expect and what reality actually gives us. Meursault's trial is a perfect example. Instead of focusing on the act itself, why he fired the gun, the court becomes obsessed with what kind of person he is. In other words, the entire direction of the trial is fundamentally misguided. Camus argues that this kind of absurdity is everywhere in our world. He makes a similar point in the myth of Sisyphus. If you look around, you'll see genuinely kind people who suffer terribly and die young. At the same time, people capable of great cruelty can become wealthy, comfortable, and happy. Some even live peaceful lives right up until the day they die. These contradictions make no sense, yet they're built into the world itself. That's the absurd. And that's exactly what Camus portrays in The Stranger. According to Camus, Meursault spends the first half of the novel almost numb to this absurdity. But during the trial in the second half, he finally awakens. When Camus talks about awakening, he means recognizing the absurd nature of reality and choosing to rebel against it. Perhaps Meursault's rebellion is refusing to fear his execution. Perhaps it's even accepting or somehow embracing the excitement that other people feel over his death. Maybe that's the only form of resistance left to him. Of course, there are countless traditional interpretations of this novel, and you're free to explore any of them. But I'd like to offer a different way of looking at The Stranger. Here's what I mean. As far as I remember, Camus published The Stranger in either 1942 or 1943, right in the middle of World War II. The entire world was trapped in the absurdity of war. It was a time when rebellion, when standing up against an absurd reality, may have been desperately necessary. But what about today? What about the 21st century? Of course, wars are still happening in parts of the world. And yes, absurdity still surrounds us in many ways. That's undeniably true. But for most of us, isn't life much closer to Meursault's life in the first half of the novel? Nothing particularly dramatic happens. Our days simply repeat themselves over and over again, like a hamster running endlessly on a wheel. And that's exactly why I think something rather surprising. Paradoxically, I believe the Meursault that Camus portrays in the first half of the novel may actually be a role model for the 21st century. What do I mean by that? Look at who Meursault is before the murder. He lives completely in the present. He doesn't dwell on the past. He doesn't worry about the future. His entire attention is fixed on the reality in front of him. When he's tired, he admits it. He doesn't pretend otherwise. Even if society expects him to behave differently, even if social customs try to pressure him into hiding his true feelings, he refuses. He expresses himself honestly. Take one of the novel's most famous conversations. Marie asks him, "Do you love me?" Meursault answers, "It didn't mean anything, but I supposed I didn't." At first, it sounds like an incredibly deflating answer, but he's simply being honest about what he feels at that moment. Then he says, "I think I could marry you." Marie asks, "How can you marry someone you don't love?" And he replies, "Because if you want to get married, I think I could." Then Marie asks, "What if another woman asked you instead?" He answers, "I suppose I could marry her too, but you're the one asking me now, so I'd marry you." Marie doesn't know how to react. Part of her is drawn to his honesty. Another part of her feels hurt by it. In a way, Meursault is completely genuine, perhaps even a little too genuine. Now think about his work. Because he's fully immersed in the present, he does an excellent job. His boss is so impressed that he offers to transfer him to the company's office in Paris. But Meursault doesn't really care whether it's Paris or somewhere else. As long as he can live in the present, it makes no difference to him. He simply does his work well, and people recognize him for it. And how does he feel about life? He's content. He's happy. He especially loves walking along the beach and swimming in the sea. Then there's Raymond. Everyone in the apartment building knows Raymond has a terrible reputation. People say he's a thug, a pimp, someone you shouldn't associate with. But Meursault never judges him. He isn't interested in Raymond's past. He simply sees the person standing in front of him. There's another famous line that perfectly captures Meursault's ability to stay rooted in the present. When asked about the shooting at the trial, Meursault simply says, "It was because of the sun." Does that sound ridiculous? The truth is, it actually was self-defense. He saw the knife. The novel clearly tells us that the Arab man pulled one out. But in that exact moment, what Meursault experienced most intensely wasn't fear. It was the blinding sunlight. Some people think that's a beautiful, poetic line. I don't. To me, it's simply a reflection of Meursault's complete honesty, his absolute sincerity. Isn't that almost chilling? Imagine answering like that in the middle of a murder trial. A man so committed to describing exactly what he experienced in that moment. Most of us don't really live in the present. The present is like water. It never stops flowing. Instead, we stand firmly on the solid ground of the past, while constantly throwing ourselves toward the future, which is as intangible as gas. Meanwhile, the present simply flows past us, and we barely notice it. But Meursault is different. It's as if he catches that flowing water and holds it in a container. Sometimes he says, "I don't love you, but I think I could marry you." Sometimes he says, "The sunlight was too bright." Sometimes he says, "I'm too tired to look at my mother's face." Isn't there something strangely compelling about him? Personally, I find the Meursault, from the first half of the novel, incredibly fascinating. I can't help thinking, this guy is extraordinary. But then, in the second half, once he's in prison, he seems to unravel emotionally. And I find myself wondering, was that really necessary? Why did Camus choose to change him like that? What if Meursault had remained the same person, even in prison? What if he had continued focusing on the present, not overflowing with emotion, but quietly immersed in each moment, even behind bars? Personally, I think I would have liked that version even more. That's why I believe that, for readers in the 21st century, the meaning of the novel has almost been reversed. The Meursault of the second half feels like a broken version of himself, but the Meursault of the first half, he's the one I see as an ideal. He's the role model. What do you think? When you look at the Meursault from the first half, do you think, I'd actually like to know someone like him? If I had a problem, maybe talking to someone like that would help me find an answer. Maybe he even comes across as someone with the quiet wisdom of a sage. That's how he feels to me. And after all, Camus is known as the philosopher of the absurd. So if he heard my interpretation, perhaps he wouldn't say, "That's a ridiculous way to read my novel." Maybe he'd simply smile and think, "Well, the world itself is absurd." If someone interprets my book in an absurd way, then that's just another example of the absurd. And perhaps he'd even be pleased that his philosophy still resonates in the 21st century. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. I'll read them all, and maybe they'll give me a new perspective as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.